are the underdog. Let's be clear about that. We are the underdog. And so we have hard work ahead of us, but we like hard work.
That is campaign rhetoric. All candidates tend to say various things to get people motivated. But when Harris says they're the underdog, the whole campaign has matched that message, including in the kind of memos and background discussions we hear from campaign aides. And independently, as we always fact check, a lot of the numbers bear this out. I've told you on this show we don't even do the national polling horse race because it's not relevant, because there's no national vote. There's the Electoral College. We do look at state polls and other indicators of what matters. So let's take a look as we end this week out of the debate and all the things that have been happening. The battleground states come down to about 7 key areas on the map you see right there. Then you look at the margin of error gap polling. That's states where even the state polling is effectively tied, and you see the same map, okay? You can go on the websites, you can go on social media, you can see a lot of discussion about this, but every key state is within the margin of error. And that means statistically they are tied. This is what Harris's campaign manager even mentioned during the Oprah event.
Where we are still in a margin of error race. It's tied. It's tied right here in Michigan. It's tied in all the battleground states. So it's going to take all of us to build a pathway, many pathways to 270 electoral votes.
Now, the reason that you always have to have some intellectual humility about the news is you don't know what's going to happen in the future. That's just in general. Then when it comes to polling, we have to remember there's general polling, like what's the president's approval rate? That's a number about right now. And then there's projections about the future within polling. If you ask people how they're going to vote in November, you're asking people about their future plans, or you can say if the election were held today, but that's an if. And then they have these voter turnout models, which are a projection of who they think will turn out. That's why if you have a big, wide polling gap of 15 points, it means a heck of a lot more than something that's basically tied or almost tied. Steve Kornacki looked at the polling averages from 2020 compared to the results. Michigan, there was final polling that had Biden up 4 points. He won by less, about 2.8. That gap between 4.2 and 2.8 can show you that the polling was about right, but the margin of error still mattered. Georgia, you see, Trump ahead by a point, but Biden won. A statistician would tell you the polling wasn't wrong. It was a reminder why the margin of error is a real thing. And finally, what we're leaving up on the screen for you will be North Carolina. Trump had a slim lead in the polling average, okay, basically about 0, but he finished the actual result by more than a point over that. Wisconsin, Biden was up over 6 points in the polling, but actually barely won. That 6-point gap wider than a typical margin of error. So you have to look at state polls, and you have to really keep in mind what margin of error means. It boils down to being effectively tied. Here's more on that point from Oprah last night.
Love having you here, but the rah-rah moment is going to end, and then we need to get to work.
Margin of error, margin calls, and tied polling in basically all the key states. Make it make sense. Obama pollster Cornell Belcher is here. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I'm going to be an angry person this segment because so first, the polling average. The polling average is garbage. It's absolute garbage, right? And you know why the polling average is garbage? It's because over the last couple of cycles, you mix in good polls with really bad polls and outliers. And if you go back to 2022 as well, you know, Ari, you had a lot of polls being outlier polls being driven, quite frankly, by Republicans to make it seem as though there was a red wave coming, right? And we've talked about this, right? There was never really any red wave coming, but if you looked at the polling average that they were manipulating, it did seem like it was a red wave coming. So throw out the polling average too, Ari, because it's garbage, because we have now pollsters who are manipulating that polling average, right? So there are some good polls out there. But I'm very dubious of the polling average right now because I know we have pollsters who are trying to manipulate that and influence public opinion. Second thing here is we too often use polling for the wrong thing. A poll is not a crystal ball. It can't tell you the future. And so a poll is not a crystal ball. As sexy as polling is and as sexy as pollsters are, we're not wizards.
Is it sexy? Let me show you what I put up on the screen from one of the states where you have Biden, Michigan, and it really illustrates this point that the margin of error is a real thing. So average, or even if you use state polls, right, his result was lower. And my question to you, when we look across that map I showed, where even if you take individual state polls, not full averages, it's often within the margin of error right now in Pennsylvania and the key states. What does that mean, the state of the race is right now there?
It means, again, that a poll can't predict the future, right? And of course, look, it's become trite, this idea. All the headlines are, it's close in the battleground states. It's going to be a close race. It's trite. Of course, it's close in the battleground states. That's why they're battleground states. I mean, there's not going to be a blowout in Michigan. There's not going to be a blowout in Pennsylvania. There's not going to be a blowout in Wisconsin. A poll is as good.
So that's
my
last question to you. I know I got angry Cornell, so I'm going to jump in again, though. When people look out there, do you think that your understanding of the data right now, is it functionally tied in those states, or do you see something else edging into a lead?
What I would look at is the trend line, right? And what I'll say is a poll, let's step back more broadly. A poll is as good as the universe that you predict it to be, right? Because in the end, what do you think the electorate is going to look like? And the electorate has been changing and moving. Like I can tell you right now that early 2008, a lot of our polling wasn't quite right because the likely voter, historical likely voter, was changing, and we had more young people and more brown people voting in those elections. So a lot of those old models were thrown out. So
the projection I talked about,
good as the universe. So the poll is as good as the universe. I think we're going to have tremendous turnout this coming election. I think we're going to have turnout that is, if not as good as 2020, perhaps better than 2020. And if you look at the registration numbers in some of these states, the new registrants are enormous. And I guarantee you most.
And now I'm
polling
over
is
on
not
time.
taking
I'm doing it again. Cornell, I'm doing that thing. It's part of my job. So I'm over on time, 20 seconds. If you had 2020 type turnout, who would win?
Harris. Donald Trump wins by subtraction, not by addition. The higher the turnout, the least likely he is to win the election.